From the Lincoln Journal-Star, this is the Life in the Red podcast with Luke Mullin and Amie Just.
Hey folks, welcome back to the Life in the Red podcast. Luke Mullin and Amie Just back with you again. It's now mid-January, lots of different Husker sports going on. We took a week off. We're back. I know we were obviously sorely missed, all of you out there. So appreciate you coming back, getting some updates for you, some football transfers, some very big games, big updates in Husker hoops to talk about as well. And as always, our week in Husker sports. We'll start off there. Nebraska wrestling, big home duel that they won over Minnesota. 300th career win for Mark Manning.
At Nebraska. Don't forget his Northern Iowa days. But yeah.
What job he's done with that program over the years.
It's incredible. And it was not a guaranteed victory. Minnesota as a team was ranked higher in 6 of the 10 matchups. Minnesota was favored, including a former Olympic gold medalist, a couple of national champions. So yeah, definitely wasn't a guarantee that they were going to win that one. But man, great matches from guys you didn't necessarily expect. So, but they got to carry that momentum over because they host Penn State, number 1 Penn State, the national champion. 11 out of the last 13 years is coming to Lincoln for the first time in like 5 years or so. So, going to be crazy. But yeah, the Nittany Lions are favored in every match. So, going to need some magic if they want to pull off what would be the upset of the century. Penn State hasn't lost a duel in 64, their last 64 attempts, which is a very long time.
Yeah, when you're that elite for so long, it becomes like commonplace, right? I mean, anybody else had any, a portion of that streak, it'd be incredible. I mean, Penn State, they do it so well. And of course, top pound for pound wrestler in the country came in, Gable Stevenson at Minnesota. But you mentioned, it's a whole different challenge for Nebraska. And I saw Mark Manning, he was trying to say, sell out the Devaney. He's trying to rally the fans for that one as well.
Yeah, and they tried to do that last year for the duel against Iowa, and they were trending in that direction until Mother Nature had other plans. So still a big crowd for that Iowa duel. I haven't looked at the weather forecast. I don't think it's going to be as bad as it was last year for that. But yeah, it's, even if you're not a wrestling fan, even if you don't understand the first thing about it, I like wrestling. It's fun. Doesn't take too long. Every match goes by pretty quick for the most part. And it's thrilling. And the diehard wrestling fans know it so well. So it's really easy to kind of like pick up on things. So yeah, if you don't have anything to do on Friday night at 8 p.m., you should go to Devaney.
Yeah, always a lot of juice in that building. And certainly that will be the case this Friday as well. And of course, wrestling in the midst of its season, let's briefly, a couple sports that have not yet started, softball and baseball, still a month away, but just briefly mentioning some of the preseason polls, some big expectations for these squads. D1 baseball has the Huskers ranked at number 24. The Husker baseball team, Softball America, their top 25 poll has Nebraska softball at number 21. So practice, of course, getting ready to go for that season. Both those teams ranked in the top 25 in those polls so far. But let's get into some of the Husker Hoops updates, some big games to talk about over these last 2 weeks or so. And as we start with the women's basketball team, if you look solely the results on the court, we'll get into some of the other stuff in a moment. But they had that 3-game losing skid, those really tough teams that they came up against. They've come back. They've won 3 in a row. They've been some tough games too. You especially look at that Michigan State game. What a big win that was for Nebraska, and Alexis Markowski, career high 28 points in that one.
Yeah, and it was so weird. It didn't feel like it, but it was. She was doing everything in that game. She's just so much fun to watch when it just feels so routine, and then you look down, you're like, oh, that's a career high for her.
I feel like she scored 20 a lot, but it's like, okay, yeah. that 28 that just elevated it a little bit.
Yeah, and for her to move into that spot was a reverse layup, which was pretty nifty and pretty on brand for what she's been able to do in her Husker career. That game, though, the catalyst late was Allison Widener. She found a spark super late, went on a little run by herself. And that run gave her confidence for the next game. And yeah, it's just, and then it all comes tumbling down.
Yeah. And of course, this is, it's kind of the unique aspects of the team being on the road, as Nebraska was. And they went on to play Rutgers, defeated them 69-62. Britt Prince had a phenomenal game as well. But with Nebraska being on the road, it was a Huskers radio network report that Allison Widener suffered potentially season-ending knee injury. And again, I don't know when we'll get the chance to hear from Amie Williams about that here soon, but just as what that means for this team and for Allison Widener, it's so tough for both of them. And just from a personal standpoint for her, how hard she worked to get back to this point to have that taken away again. It's just hard to see.
Yeah. And the game before the Rutgers game, she said that the last few minutes of the game before that, and then the one right before the Rutgers game, she was finally getting her confidence back. She was finally feeling like herself, and you could see it. And then for her, 3 days later to go down with another season-ending injury, potentially. We haven't gotten confirmation on it, but that is their fear. All of the words that come to mind are not appropriate for the podcast. It's just expletive after expletive. It's just like, are you serious? Like, she's worked so hard to bounce back from not just one, but 2 very severe knee injuries that left her out she didn't play a meaningful game of basketball for a year and a half. She basically missed 2 seasons. And now for it to happen again, like, I'm just like, are you kidding me? It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, just not fair is really what you would say. And, it's a player, too, is part of the heart and soul of this team. Her antics is part of the bench mob. I think people love that. But she preferred to be on the court, of course, not the bench. And, with Natalie Potts going down earlier in the season, too, I mean, this is a thin rotation for the Nebraska women's basketball team. Yes, they do get a lot of those players out on the court, but I think we're starting to see some of these games like Britt Prince, Callan Hake, they're playing 35, 36 minutes these last couple of games.
Well, they have to.
Yep.
And now you can't do anything about it if you don't have Allison. You're going to have to do that. Yeah, it's frustrating, but you don't expect to lose 2 people, 2 of your better people, in terms of energy and can do it all and fearless. Yeah, everybody's going to have to step up. But I particularly feel for Alexis Markowski. Allison is one of her best friends, and she loves playing with Natalie. And in her last season, she doesn't get to finish it out with either of them. I don't know. It makes me sad.
Yeah, it's very, very difficult for that team to absorb. But of course, I mean, they got to get their head down. They have some tough games coming up. But what they do have this week, they play at Iowa on Thursday and then host Wisconsin on Monday. I know everybody knows, the heights of Iowa last couple seasons, but those 2 teams combined record of 3-9 in Big Ten play at the moment. I mean, there's an opportunity for Nebraska to keep that winning streak going. Just got to stay locked in and focused and figure out how that rotation is going to look with no Widener in the mix.
Yeah, and Iowa's always a tough test, right? Even if you don't have Caitlin Clark and you have a new coach and, it goes beyond Caitlin Clark. They lost a lot of players, but they're still really good. So just got to take it as it comes. And Iowa's always a tough place to play, too. So.
Yep. Tough to go on the road and win there. Most certainly
for the men,
yeah. I was
and
going to
the
say,
women.
as the men's team well knows from a recent result. And as we move on to the Husker men's team, you'd say a great win, potentially, one of those that stands out at the end of the season, followed by a big letdown on a blowout that kind of overshadows that. I mean, it's tough to look at that UCLA win in the context of the last 2 games, honestly.
Yeah, is it PBA magic? Is it? I don't know if this team knows who it is. Like, what's it like? We know that it's a defensive identity, but then you lose a 15-point lead in the second half against Iowa. And yes, the officiating was pretty questionable at best, but the officials still blew the whistle enough for them to get to the line enough times that they missed 10 free throws. So, make one of those and it doesn't go to overtime. Make one of those and you win that game. So, not great. And then, full disclosure, I did not watch the Purdue game. I had no interest in watching it. I knew it was going to be.
It was over pretty quick, so
I knew it was going to be ugly. I didn't anticipate it being like near career blowout bad. But again, gotta find the wins where you can get them. And I don't know if this says more about Purdue or Nebraska, if we're being honest. I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, most definitely. And I mean, when you look at that UCLA game, Nebraska, I mean, that defense, they held UCLA, to nothing. I mean, they were jacking up shots that had no chance of falling. I mean, they were trying to push the pace, but Nebraska kept keeping them from doing that.
It disrupted a lot of passing lanes in that game. I mean, played really solid defense.
Phenomenal defense. And then at Iowa, 17 of 35 from three-point range. Purdue made 19 three-pointers against this team. I mean, that disparity is just incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. And at Iowa, they only made, I don't have the number off the top of my head, but they were bad, finishing at the rim. I think they only made 60-ish% of their layups. That's not a recipe for success.
Yeah. And I think, to go to your point about the identity of this team too, outside of Bryce Williams, who are the no doubt scorers on this team? They don't have all those guys you can always turn to for scoring. And then you have kind of that philosophy issue of being an offensive versus a defensive team. Yeah, okay, you're a great defensive team. That means you can scrap and claw and, fight these, overmatched opponents, maybe bring them down to your level. But then at the same time, it's really hard to elevate if your defense isn't there and you're a defensive focused team. You're screwed. And that's basically what happened against Purdue.
Yeah. Yeah. You cannot let that happen. 19 threes.
Yeah. Very tough for Nebraska to stomach those last two losses, because you looked at that UCLA win. That's still going to be good on the NCAA tournament resume. That's not going away, but still every game in Big Ten play so difficult. And Nebraska's next two coming up. They host Rutgers on Thursday in another dreaded early weekend slot, Sunday, 11 a.m. Central at Maryland.
And not just that. You know what else is going on in DC that weekend?
Oh, I'm sure there's nothing going on.
Nothing. No, it's inauguration weekend. So hopefully that they can get in and out smoothly. Because inauguration weekend, regardless of who is taking office, is always chaotic.
Yeah, there'll be a lot of folks in here.
Yeah. There's always a ton of people. Not that they're, taking the metro or anything, but traffic's going to be crazy. So
yeah, that'll be an interesting trip.
I can't wait to hear about the logistics of it afterwards, because I know they're all stressed out about it beforehand.
Yep. And before they get there, again, Rutgers is coming up next for the Huskers men's team Thursday night. That's our Husker Hoops update. And we'll get on to a bit of football. Again, some of the transfer movement, off-season roster decisions, that stuff has been going on. But want to start on special teams, where Ed Foley, his contract was running through the end of December. Confirmed for Nebraska, he will not return next season as their special teams coordinator. This is a move that a lot of people maybe saw coming with how poorly special teams played this season. But, worth bringing up the question, did it happen maybe a year too late?
Potentially.
It would have been really aggressive for him to make that, for Matt Rule to make that
for
decision
sure.
Last year. Yeah.
I wondered if he was going to make the offensive coordinator and special teams coordinator switch at the same time. I wondered if that would have been something to maybe look at, but no, didn't happen that way. So can't do anything about it now, but I am very curious to see what they do there. I do not think Ed is the only change that they're going to make in that department. Sounds like some other staffers are going to either be reassigned or let go. So definitely watch that, because how do I say this nicely? I'm not going to say it nicely. special teams was a disaster. It was a liability all season, several different ways. Like, why do we know all of the names of all of the long snappers? That's not great, right? Brian Buschini at points was the hero of games, and then bewilderingly had some issues as well. Can't forget all the other kicking issues that happened before John Hull kind of figured it out and settled in a little bit. Returns were horrific, near the bottom of the league, near the bottom of the NCAA again in that regard. Lots of turnovers on special teams, blocked field goals, blocked punts. It's just a mess. Or I can't remember what game it was because they all kind of run together with all the issues. But the like botched like punt return, which, well, I guess that doesn't clear it up for you. Where a miscommunication that led to a turnover and scoring. What game was that? Where it's like Shavers, I think, was involved in it, maybe.
Oh yeah, was that Illinois?
I can't. It feels more recent. I don't know. But the problem there is we don't remember which one it was because there were so many issues. So I really like Ed Foley. I think he's a good person that I have, gotten to know. But at the end of the day, you have to win and you have to succeed. And for whatever reason, things were not clicking. And they were a liability. And it cost Nebraska multiple wins this season. The just ineptitude at special teams all across the board. And that cannot happen moving forward.
Yep.
Sorry, I love special teams, and watching bad special teams makes me very angry.
Yeah, well, I bring up the question of like, did it happen a year too late? Because yes, Ed Foley and Matt Rule, they go way back. Like, I'm sure they have this all diagrammed how they want the special teams to look. But I mean, that unit was bad in 2023.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, there was no question about that. And then they regressed in almost every category this season. And it's like, well, you could have changed that. You could have done something to potentially keep that from happening over the off season. And certainly the different miscues that they had, some of it is, you can blame that on the players, sure, but some of it is coaching. It comes down to coaching, right? I mean, you got to get those guys ready for those opportunities, let them know what to do in every situation. Look at a team like Iowa, who's obviously one of the shining examples, but there are many other teams in college football that special teams units, they don't make mistakes. They know what they're doing, right? They're calm, they're composed. I mean, Nebraska every week on special teams, it's like they're running around. You don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. And you cannot have that, period.
Yep. So, I mean, this is something that's going to play into the way that Nebraska performs in 2025. I mean, can they get that special teams unit fixed? It's going to be a big task for whoever takes on that role as special teams coordinator. But that was something notable that took place here the last couple of weeks, Ed Foley's contract expiring. But let's talk about the roster. Of course, still so much coming, going. That 105 roster limit, that'll take us a long, long time to reach. But let's talk about a few of the veteran players on this roster, guys who were maybe not going to come back, maybe will. Tight end Thomas Fidone, currently we expect him to enter the NFL draft. He had some cryptic social media, said he wasn't coming back. And again, we wait for the official confirmation that he says he's going to the NFL. But as it stands right now, set to move on, and good for him to get 2 full healthy years at a Nebraska uniform. But you still have to feel that he's going to be a loss for this team. But the way that especially Nebraska wants to use that tight end position, they're going to have some guys there who can fill in as well.
Yeah, I wish him the best. I don't know if that's the right move, but maybe he's been told otherwise. I think another season would do him well, but what do I know? But yeah, I really like where the tight end room sits, even without him. Got to remember, Heinrich Harburg, tight end now. And I think that's coming along really nicely. I really like what Carter Nelson can add to that room because he is going to be shifting back out to tight end. So, and then all the other guys that had drastically changed roles after Dana Holgerson came in.
Yeah, this this to me feels like part of the Satterfield, the Holgorsen shift continuing. And like, obviously the tight ends are still going to be part of this offense. You're still going to have to block, still going to have to put your hand in the dirt sometimes. But you think of a guy like Heinrich Haarberg, Carr Nelson, like these tight ends, these are going to be really important pass catchers in the Holgorsen offense. And so I think maybe the type of tight end that he needs on this roster is maybe shifting a little bit in that aspect.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yep. So that's Fedoni, a player who's coming back, linebacker Javen Wright, returning for 7th season, got a medical hardship waiver from the NCAA. You were able to talk with him this season and hear some of the, frankly, gross details about what he's gone through, the blood clots, and which really sidelined him over these last couple seasons. But such an important player for this Nebraska defense. And even when he wasn't able to practice, he wasn't able to be...
Which is wild.
Yeah, he wasn't able to be full strength for this team down the stretch. He was still making a big impact in these games.
Yeah, which that's crazy. Like, think about that for a second. He didn't practice all week and then would play in games. And the reason why that is, not to, extend this conversation a lot longer, you cannot play football when you're on blood thinners. So him and his medical staff at the University of North Carolina and the training staff here at Nebraska kind of devised this plan that they didn't know if it would work because it had never been done before, where he'd be on blood thinners all week and he'd like kind of shadow and kind of like do obviously like no contact, like practice like kind of by himself off to the side, following through, kind of shadowing like what Bullock would be doing in practice. And then he'd go off of them so he could play in the games. And then once the game was over, then he'd be back on them. Crazy. But it worked for him and still played really well. His conditioning, he admitted to me in that first game back against Purdue, was not where it needed to be. He was very gassed after a few plays, but he built that up, right? So yeah, and this had been like in the works for a while. I had talked to some people close to Javen at the USC game. I ran into them and they said that they were trying for this, but they didn't know if it was going to be possible, if it would be granted. So this had been in the works for a while, but they didn't know what the result of that was going to be. So I'm happy for him. I know that if he would try to make his way in the NFL or CFL or any other league, that teams are leery of blood clots. So if, in the grand scheme of things, if he has a full healthy season where he isn't having to deal with this, what that can do for his future, I think is the long-term vision here.
Yeah, I think in a world of kind of like unlimited eligibility that we're kind of running into here in the NCAA, I think he's the guy that, if you're like, oh, somebody's in school for 7 seasons, it's like everything that he's been through, right? Just to come back for another year to have that opportunity with the team, I think is going to mean so much. So that's really impressive. And for a Nebraska linebacker room that
they need it,
was losing a lot of talent. I mean, they were going to be a question mark of this team. He certainly comes back and answers some of those questions as well as about who's going to be those starters, who's going to be those main guys. So that is a big pickup for Nebraska. And as we talk about these eligibility decisions, worth mentioning, Deshaun Singleton could perhaps return to the team. Again, nothing concrete there yet to report on for you, but I looked into this. The NCAA, they extended a blanket waiver. This is in relation to a lawsuit filed by Vanderbilt quarterback Diego Pavia. And basically, the lawsuit was that if the NCAA is going to ban junior college players from the same 4-year limit that NCAA players who only play at the NCAA level do, you're basically denying them the opportunity to make money. It's a federal antitrust thing. And so it was a federal court in Tennessee. I know we're getting into the weeds here on this offseason podcast, but basically the federal court in Tennessee sided with him. The NCAA said, we don't want to get sued a bajillion times. So they're just going to let junior college athletes get an extra year of eligibility. There was a lot of misinformation about this too. Only guys who had under 4 years, because the NCAA still legally, they can enforce that 4-year eligibility rule. So if you had under 4 years at the NCAA level. You had those JUCO years. They'd extend you another year. Deshaun Singleton, 3 years at Nebraska. We'll see. He could apply for that waiver if he likes.
Because he did apply for a medical waiver for not this most recent season, but the season before, when he played in 4 games plus 1 play against Michigan, and that was denied. So they have been looking for him. They have been looking for ways for him to get another year, even before this blanket waiver.
Yeah, and I mean, he's maybe going to go to the NFL draft. He had been announced the East-West Shrine Bowl. So again, I mean, expect he's going to have to make a decision soon about what he wants to do there, but that's something to keep an eye on, whether he could come back or not. But something else that factors into this as we get into some of the transfer pickups, Nebraska's added a whole ton of guys to that secondary room. There's a lot of guys on the roster in that room right now. Not all of them are going to make it to the fall. So, I mean, that's part of the decision. Do you have room for a guy to potentially come back?
They'd make room for him.
Oh, yeah. You make room for
him.
Returning black shirt 2-year starter. But as we talk about these transfer pickups, let's start with those defensive backs. Jameer Khan joining Nebraska from the FCS level. Expect him to be a good cornerback prospect. And as well, another upside defensive back, Marquise Groves-Killebrew. Bounced around a little bit here at the FBS level, but experienced defensive back. And 2 other guys Nebraska landed, linebacker Marcus Groves-Killebrew. Marquise Watson-Trent.
I'm
is
like,
the
what?
linebacker.
I'm like,
yeah,
what?
There's not 2 of them. Marcus Watson-Trent is the linebacker pickup from Georgia Southern.
Which, fun story about him. Guess what his breakout game of his career was, folks?
I can't remember any notable Georgia Southern games over the last few years.
Yeah, that was his first breakout game. So the end of the Scott Frost era.
45-42. Yep.
Yes.
The game.
Wild game. Crazy game. But yeah, that was his breakout game. So it's all coming full circle for that kid.
Yeah. So Nebraska adds that linebacker pickup, a 1 year of eligibility there as well. And then offensive lineman Elijah Pritchett, a former 5-star recruit coming over from Alabama. As you look at those 4 guys who they've added recently, I mean, who stands out to you as maybe the most impactful?
That linebacker and the offensive lineman.
I would agree with you. Yep. I mean, 5-star O-lineman. I mean, you talk about adding a guy like that. Forget about that. A guy who started 12 games at Alabama last year. Anybody in the country would take that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Especially just knowing where Nebraska is right now with its offensive line. You lose several guys who've played a lot of football. And so anytime that you can replace them with guys who've played a lot of football and are fundamentally sound, you'll take it every time.
Yeah, I mean, Nebraska, give them a lot of credit for how aggressive they've been in the transfer portal, going after some of these top guys. They took a lot of swings, all the top offensive tackles. I mean, they reached out to all those guys, brought in several of them for visits. Landing Pritchett at least gives him one of those players, solidly locked up. And I mean, he played at right tackle last year. Whether they want to play him at left or not, we'll see. But you would think that would be pretty seamless. They need a new right tackle.
They do.
Pritchett's
indeed.
there. I mean, that's a pretty big need filled if that's indeed how it plays out.
Look, I like that. It's mostly seamless. And you're replacing a guy who's been here like basically since the dawn of time. So no offense, but he'd been here forever.
I mean, he, by and far, Bryce Benhart, most games played in Nebraska football history. So what can you say about that?
It's hard to replace that.
Yep. And hard to do at offensive tackle, no less. So Pritchett coming in, big pickup for Nebraska. And wrapping up here, some of the football discussion. Next couple weeks progressing. What's going to happen? Well, final transfer visits, these will take place really next week ahead of the start of the spring semester. That is Tuesday here for UNL. Players, again, if they want to take part in the spring, they do need to be enrolled for that. And still, some transfer visits will be ongoing. Some of that stuff will take a little while. Players can sign, the paperwork can take a bit to get processed. So that'll be something to watch for. In terms of recruiting, Nebraska coaches, they'll be out on the road again all month. They'll be taking visits, looking at a lot of those top 2026 guys. I know they've got a junior day locked in for that first weekend of February. Could be some commitments getting the ball rolling after that. And then as well, with players back on campus, winter mat drills will start up. Not a favorite of the players, some tough workouts. And to be honest, it always does lead to some roster attrition. Probably some guys will move on after that winter workout period.
Yeah, whatever it takes.
Yeah, so that is what's coming up next here in the next couple of weeks for Nebraska football, and as well all those Husker hoops games coming up, big wrestling duel, so much to cover for you. All those updates will be at journalstar.com, and we'll look forward to breaking it down when we return next time. That's been this episode of the Life in the Red podcast. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to this week's Life in the Red podcast. Our theme music is composed by Sasha Indy. The stories continue on journalstar.com.